have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to post them in the chat, and we will be doing a Q&A about student finance at the end. Okay, so what we will cover then in this session today, so we'll look at what the costs are involved with student finance, how do students go about paying for it, when and how the repayments work and when they start, and also at the end, I'll be touching on what support is available for students. Okay then, so what are the costs of going to university? So there are two main costs involved with going to university. One is the one on the left-hand side, which is tuition fees, and this covers the cost of the tuition, so the teaching and the facilities that the university provides when you are a student. And then the other main cost is your living costs, so all your expenses, housing, and all the other things that you do outside of your course in your spare time. So how do students pay for it all then? Well, there's a number of different ways in which they pay for it. Some of these are in the forms of loans, and they are repayable support options. And then there are other non-repayable support options in the form of things like scholarships, bursaries, and also additional support packages, which I'll talk about a bit later on. So we'll be delving into each of these different categories in further detail. And the first one is the sort of student finance and the repayable support. We'll be breaking these two down, the tuition fee and the maintenance loan, in further detail. So a note that's really important is you do not have to have a confirmed place at university before starting to apply for student finance. This is so often misconceived, and I even did this myself, or believed this until I was told actually that I don't need to wait for offers to come back from university before starting to apply for student finance. As you can see here with the logo, it's time to apply any time once you've basically submitted your UCAS application. So you can do it as soon as you've made that submission, you can start applying for student finance with Student Finance England. And if you are sort of mainly based in other places in the UK, like Wales and Scotland, they have similar systems, Student Finance Wales and Student Finance Scotland, Northern Ireland as well. So how you will pay for it then? So one form of repayable support is this thing called tuition fee loan. And this is a loan which covers the cost of tuition for most, or if not all, undergraduate degrees in the UK. Now, undergraduate degree programmes, tuition fees are usually set at a particular figure. So for most courses across the UK, this is at the moment £9,250. You've probably heard this figure either with friends or family who may have gone to university before. And this is a capped figure which the government have capped. So no university can charge any more than this for undergraduate courses at the 2021 entry. Now, these do change over time, but that is a more sort of government-wide policy if there's going to be a change. And at the moment, there's no announcement about any changes. So it's highly likely in the years that your son and daughter will be going to university in the next 2 or 3 years' time, that this figure will still be the same. But not all courses are actually at that figure. Some are slightly lower. So some university courses or higher education courses are actually taught in local colleges, and there are a range of colleges across the region, such as Abingdon and Whitney, Reading, etc. And those courses sometimes can be a little bit lower than £9,250, but they will not be lower than this figure of £6,165. So all courses within the UK are between these two figures at the current entry, but it isn't likely to change between now and the next few years. Another type of degree that you may have heard of, and we've had discussions on this in previous space sessions, is foundation degrees. So we already know the distinction between undergraduate degrees, which are those courses mainly taught at universities, and these courses called foundation degrees, which are often taught in further education colleges. Now, foundation degrees, one of these sort of attractions to these courses are that they generally are a little bit cheaper in terms of their tuition fees than those courses taught at the university institutions. So most courses, most foundation degree courses taught in further education colleges cost around £7,395 per year. So it's about £2,000 cheaper than those taught at universities. But they can vary. And also what you can do is often courses at the further education colleges, the foundation degree courses, are up to 2 years in length. Some of them are a bit longer, but most of them are 2 years in length. But often what students do is when they've done those 2 years, often if they've liked the programme that they've done and maybe want to continue their studies, they may opt to do a top-up year at a full, at a university, so a fully fledged year at university. And what that would mean, if you did that route, an option, you would then pay the 7,000 figure for when you're at the 2 years at the college, and then you would pay the £9,250 for the top up here. So there is a distinction and a difference there. Okay then, so how the tuition fee loan works. So it's available to all families, students within England and Wales, and it's not dependent on family income. This is important because when we get onto the maintenance loan, there will be a distinction because the maintenance loan is assessed based on family income. The tuition fee loan is not. It doesn't matter what income your household has. You will be entitled to the full tuition fee loan. But it's important to note that you will only repay the loan when you finish or leave the course. So if you decide that you don't want to continue that course, maybe after 18 months, it will then, you start to repay it in the April after you finish that course. But, and we will explain this a bit more later on, it will only be after you earn a certain figure in that April in the year that you graduate. So we'll be talking about repayment thresholds in a few slides' time, but it's important to sort of get across that you don't start paying the tuition fee loan when you start the course. You repay it after you complete the course. So you don't need to worry too much about the loan when you're doing the course itself. So how do tuition fees work then? Well, what happens is, no matter what university you apply for, whether it's Brookes University or another university, all students will apply for student finance through Student Finance England, SFE for short. Or if you're living in Wales and Scotland, Northern Ireland, they have the similar systems there as well. And then what happens is, when you apply for that tuition fee loan, that gets paid directly to the university. So you can see here, it goes straight from Student Finance England to Brookes. You don't see that money, it goes straight to the university. And that's different to the maintenance loan, which we'll be talking about next, because that is paid into either a student's bank account or, if you've opted to, a parent or representative guardian's bank account. So you will be managing that finance. But the tuition fee, that goes straight to the university. So you don't really need to worry about managing that money and making those tuition fee loan payments. So how will you pay for it all then? So the next sort of important student finance package we'll be exploring is the maintenance loans. We've spoken about the tuition loan, which pays for the tuition fees at the university. The next bit we'll be talking about is the maintenance loan. So the maintenance loan covers all living costs. So this includes things like clothes, stationery, utensils, all of the things that you need to live while you're at university. And the maintenance loan amount does depend on where you live and also on your household income. So this is quite significant, and I'll be breaking this down for you. And it's paid into your account in 3 instalments. So the instalments are usually at the start of October, the start of January, and the start of April. And that will be divided by whatever amount you get, and it's divided by 3. So that will be your 3 instalments. But similarly to the tuition fee loan, this last point, the same rules apply. It's only repaid when you complete the course or if you leave the course prematurely, and also only if you're over the certain threshold period, which we'll be talking about that shortly. So that's the similarity with the tuition fee loan in terms of the repayments, but in terms of the amount you get and how it is paid to you, that is different. The amount you get is dependent on household income, and it is paid into your account. So either the student themselves, if they have their own bank account, or yourselves as parents and guardians, if you want to be nominated to manage it on behalf of the student, you will be responsible for managing that money. Whereas the tuition fee loan goes from Student Finance England and straight to the university. So let's delve a little bit further then into the amounts that you can get. So there are 3 types of amounts and how they're divided up. So you've got one amount if the student is living at home, and this includes if they're commuting. So if they choose to live, let's say, in Buckinghamshire and commute to Brookes, they would be eligible for this one here, which is students living at home. However, if they're living in Buckinghamshire but want to have accommodation at Brookes, they would be in this second category, which is students living away from home but outside of London. Now, the way the student finance system works, and this is a little bit controversial, is they do actually specify different amounts if you're living or the university is based within Greater London. But there's no other region which there's a specified difference for. It's only London at the moment. There has been debates in the past about other cities joining London, in being eligible for higher amounts. But at the moment, as it stands, it's only London that is a sort of special case, if you like, in being eligible for the extra amount of funding, probably because, as we mostly all know, London is quite an expensive city to live in. So you can see the amounts here. The maximum maintenance loan is up to £7,987 per year if you're living at home. It's up to £9,488 if you're living away from home, and that's not based in London. So Oxford will be one of those cities in that category. And then the last one here is if you're living away from home but studying in London. So if you're living in Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, etc., but you're going to university in central London and Greater London as well. So if you're going to like Kingston or Middlesex, this would also be included. You would be eligible for up to £12,382. And you can see the amounts broken down per week there. So if you're living at home, it's about £67 per week. If you're living away from home outside of London, it's about £102 per week. And if you're living away from home but studying in London, it's about £135 per week. Now, we'll break down the maintenance loan scale in England for the next academic year based on your household income. So if your household income is below £25,000 or at £25,000, you will be eligible for the maximum. And it doesn't matter how much lower your income is, the figure will stay the same. So those are the figures, those three figures there, 7,987, 9,488 and 12,382, which we discussed on the previous slide. That is if your household income is 25,000 or less. And I'll quickly explain about how household income is calculated, because obviously each family and each student is in different situations. So your household income is, for the student, the household in which they live for most of the time. So for most people, that will be the parents or guardians that they're living with on a sort of day-to-day basis. But obviously not all families are structured in that way. For example, if your parents are divorced, it would be the household income where you live for most of the time. So my cousin, for example, was in this category. So he lived with his mum 5 days of the week when he went to school and college, and then at weekends came to live with his dad between Friday and Sunday. When it came to submitting his sort of statement for applying for student finance, he would have to base his household income off of the house where he lived with his mum, because that's where he lived most of the time. Usually the rule of thumb is if you're living in the house more than about 4 days per week, that is the house that you're regarded as living in, and that's the household income that student finance will take the figures from. Now, the student finance eligibility goes down what is sort of known as a sliding scale. So you can see here, the higher household income that you have, unfortunately, the less amount of finance you will be entitled to. But there is a minimum. So if your household income is quite high, it won't sort of then be depleted to nothing. There is a very minimum of, if you're living at home, £3,516. If you're living away from home outside of London, £4,733. And if you're living away from home in London, £7,458. And that caps at about 60 to 62,000. So if your household income is more than that, it doesn't matter how much more than that it is. Let's say it was 80,000, the student in that household would still be eligible for these figures on the 60,000 chart. However, for some, which is a little bit confusing actually, if you're living away from home outside of London, it's actually at 65,000, but the other two are at 60,000. I just checked this afternoon with student finance, and this is for the current academic year. So you can see here that if you're earning 25,000 or less, the amount doesn't really change. And if you're earning above about 60 to 65,000, that will be the minimum amount no matter what you're earning. And as we've already discussed, if your son or daughter plans to commute, that will be regarded as living at home. So that generally means you're entitled to less, but there are a couple of exceptions to that rule. If you do have any questions about these figures or want to ask anything at the end, feel free to post in the chat function, and I'm more than happy to go through it if you have maybe a more personal situation or you just want to make sure that I clarify something for you. That's absolutely fine. So I'll move on to the next section. And how does household income work? So if you're under 25, which most students are, but not all students, lots of students do go to university as a mature learner, either in middle age or even older. There were students on my course who were 65 who are starting a course for the first time, which is amazing. But most students in the UK generally are under the age of 25, so they'll be in this top category. So that's then based on your parent or carer's household income. And then, as I've said earlier, if your parents or carers are separated, or let's say maybe you live with grandparents, it's then based on the household income where you live most of the time. However, the rule changes slightly if you're over 25. So if you're going to university as a little bit of a more mature, older student, it will then be based on your household income for the past year. And that will depend on what sort of household structure you're living in. So if you're living on your own, it will be solely based on the income you've earned. If you're living with a partner or another person in that household, it will also include their income in the mix. But if you're living in a household of multiple occupations, that's where two or more of you in the house are sort of single adults living in a house share, it won't be based on their income. It'll only be based on your individual income. And income includes salary, but it also includes other things. So my dad took early retirement a year before me going to university, and his private pension was counted as income towards the household income. So therefore, my maintenance loan was factored in when his pension was taken into account. So it includes salaries, pensions, investments, and also property. So if you're renting out another property and gaining income from that property, that also counts for income when student finance calculates the household income for your household. Also, any questions on that or any clarity, feel free to ask in the chat and I will clarify and answer any questions at the end. So how does the maintenance loan work then in terms of transferring it from student finance England to you? So what happens is it goes from student finance England into either a bank account that you've set up with student finance themselves. So that could be a student bank account that the student has. I do encourage you, or one of my sort of tips and advice would be to open a bank account when you go to university, because it's good for you to be managing your own money, and also it's quite useful for when your maintenance loan comes in. But if you if the student doesn't want to do that for whatever reason, you can designate it to a family member. So it can be a parent, a guardian, a carer, or somebody else that you trust in the family, and then the maintenance loan can go into that account. So what happens then after you've sort of finished your studies? Congratulations, you graduate. What happens with repayments? Because of course, these are repayable loans. You do have to pay them back. So both loans are combined into one amount when you graduate, and the repayments start in the April after your course finishes. So let's take me for an example. I graduated in June 2019. So I've been a graduate for about 32 months. But I'm not actually at the moment repaying any of my student loan. And that's because you only start repaying your student loan when you earn over $27,295 per year. And I will share this with you. I'm not earning that amount at the moment. So therefore, I do not have to pay any of it back while I'm not earning anything under that figure. But usually as time goes on and as you get more experience in life and you increase and sort of progress in your employment, generally your salary goes up. So by the time I get into my 30s and 40s, I will probably be repaying the student loan. And how that works is you repay the student loan at 9% above this figure here. So it doesn't sort of mean that the more that you earn, you're paying loads back, or you sort of have to be fearing that it's going to be hanging over you for years and years and years until you retire, because of course, actually it's wiped after 30 years. So you don't have to worry about it when you're retired, or if for whatever, let's say in a terrible scenario that you die early, it doesn't actually get passed on to anybody else either. Whereas let's say a mortgage, you might have to repossess that house or cancel that mortgage. With a student loan, it doesn't get passed on to anybody else. So for whatever reason, it would never be a burden on anybody else. It does attract interest rates, so that is something to be aware of. But the interest rates are only sort of included on top of the loan amount. So you wouldn't necessarily be paying more with including interest. What happens is it's still 9% over the 27,295 figure. So, for example, how much do you spend on a phone bill? If you could put in the chat function or shout out on your microphones, how much do you spend roughly on a phone bill? And I'll explain the significance of this once we get some answers in. I'll just have a look at the chat.
Ross, do you mind if you could just repeat the part about the 9% repayments, please?
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, so what happens is with the 9% figure is you start repaying your student loan when you earn over 27,295 per year, and it's only up to 9% over that figure. So let's say you earn 30,000, you would only repay 9% between 27,295 and 30,000. So it's about 2,600 or something. So you would only pay 9% of that. And the reason why I've asked this question about how much you spend on a phone bill is roughly in the UK, the average phone bill is about £35, £40. And that's roughly about the same amount that you'll be paying back per month of your student loan when you're earning over this figure. So it's not really something of a very high figure when you start paying it back. It pays back in a fair process over 30 years. And if you aren't able to repay it all in 30 years, it is then wiped. So it's not hanging over you for sort of into retirement, etc. And it, as I was saying, it doesn't pass on to anybody else. So for whatever reason, if you can no longer pay it, or let's say you die early, it doesn't get passed on to anybody else. Whereas other types of loans in life would. So that's the sort of difference between this loan and any other loan that you may get in your adult life. Does that help answer the question? Does anyone have any other question they want to ask? When it says there are loans paid back on earnings or income, to me, I would say that's the same thing, but it's based on income. I see the difference there because even if you're, let's say, not earning, and let's say you're renting out a property and getting income from that, that would still count towards the paying it back, and also count, going back to what we were talking about earlier about taking out a maintenance loan, that would count as income for the maintenance loan as well. So in terms of that distinction between our loans paid back between earnings and income, it's kind of both, but if you're not earning anything in terms of a salary, but you are getting income from other sources like pensions or renting out a property, that would count for the repayments and also would count for the earlier topic when we were talking about applying for the maintenance loan. Is that okay, Hannah? Any follow up on that?
No, I think that was that's made all clear. Thank you, Ross. Okay,
cool. So the repayments then, this is sort of how the 9% how it be deducted from. So let's say you're earning 30,000 then, it would be 9% of £2,705. So that monthly repayment approximately is about £20. And as you can see, if your income goes up over time, which for most people it usually does, let's say it was 35,000, then it'll be 9% deducted from £7,705. So that's about a monthly repayment of £58. So you can see how over time you'll start paying very slightly a little bit more, but it's all in line with sort of what your income is before tax. But that good question that was asked earlier about earnings, the distinction between earnings and income, if you're not having a salaried income, but you are getting income coming in from other streams, that would be counted for these figures. So this is kind of what it looks like on a payslip. So for many parents and adults in the audience, this probably looks very familiar to you. But it's a little bit like actually when you have your tax and national insurance go out on the deductions of your payslip, the student loan will sort of fit in at the bottom there and will be that amount of whatever. So in this case, it'd be £20, and it will be ever slightly more or less depending on what you're earning. So this is how it will look on your bank statement, but you won't see that money. That money will be taken out before you actually get your net pay. So it's already removed before that point. So you don't have to worry about going into the bank and paying this £20. It's already taken out for you. So we've spoken so far about the tuition fee loan and the maintenance loan. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the process of applying for these. So it's very important that you apply as soon as possible, and you do not need to have a confirmed university place before making an application. And that is important because there is a deadline or a cut-off for applying, and that this year would be the 21st of May, and it roughly is around the end of May each year. How the assessment works, you will need to have a supporting documentation, and that is usually in the form of things like a passport, a driving license if your son and daughter has one, or other things like a birth certificate. So you normally need 2 documents, but you may need a few more if Student Finance England asks for it. Usually the 2 I would say as a rule of thumb would be a passport and a birth certificate, but also if you do have a driving license, that can be helpful as well. And then a notification will be sent to you once you submit your application saying that Student Finance England have received it and will be processing it. So what happens is you need to sign a declaration form and then return it to Student Finance England, and you need to submit the supporting documentation to be able to enrol. And then when it gets to the point when you start university, the payment schedule letter will be sent to you. Now, importantly, they don't usually send you the first payment of the student finance on the week that you start, although this does differ by university because not all universities start at the same time. But most universities begin teaching on the third week of September. But in the UK, in England, to make it a fair system, student finance always supply the first payment within the first week of October each year. So for some universities, that will be after the date you start. Now, that can be good and bad. It can be good in the sense that a lot of students, they might not have managed this type of money before and not know how to do it. And there are students who spend a lot in a very short space of time, and then they're therefore not having much of a balance for the rest of term. So it's good that they're not spending it all when they're starting, but it does mean that the student probably will need some savings or a little bit of income for the first 2 weeks of when they start university before this payment arrives. And that payment schedule does not really change each year. It's roughly the first week of October, first week of January, and the first week of April. So as we were saying earlier, it's broken up into 3 instalments. So how will you pay for it all? So far, we've spoken about repayable sources, but a lot of students take advantage and are eligible for non-repayable sources. And these are in the form of things like scholarships, bursaries, and also additional support for more particular circumstances. So scholarships then, these are linked usually to academic results or achievement. So if you're particularly outstanding in a certain area, maybe music or sports, or maybe something very academic, like maybe you might have a maths scholarship, for example, you can apply for scholarships at each given university, and they will be awarded based on merit. But I will warn, though, that there aren't that many scholarships available per sort of cohort. So let's say there was a scholarship for sport. Usually they might have 5 scholarships available. So they are very competitive. And if you want to make an application, or you think your son or daughter would be eligible for that scholarship, it's good to put an application in early to be able to be awarded it. But they can also be given on other things which may be not related to academic results. So if you've participated in extracurricular activities, maybe it could be things like the Duke of Edinburgh Award, or maybe volunteering that you've done in the community, that sometimes can also be on the merit of how you'll be awarded a scholarship as well. Some universities also issue scholarships for local students. So let's say if you live in a certain postcode or a certain region, you can also be eligible for scholarships too. Bursaries are a little bit different, and these are more usually linked to personal circumstances and also household income as well. And they usually take the form of things like discounted accommodation, discounted tuition fees, or also financial aid, which you are able to obtain at any point throughout your course. However, and this is not something to be worried too much about, in order to be sort of eligible for bursaries, you need to share as much information as needed. You don't need to share everything, but you need to share as much information as needed so that the university can support you as much as they can when it comes to your personal circumstances. So let's say, for example, in the context, let's say a family member sadly passes away shortly before going to university, and therefore your personal circumstances have changed from when you've made the initial student finance application. It will be on those sorts of grounds that you'd be eligible for financial aid. And especially at the moment, given the coronavirus pandemic and things are in quite different situations, if, for example, your income suddenly drastically changes and the student needs a lot of extra support, there is financial aid available. And particularly at the moment, there's an increased amount of financial aid. The government has given universities extra money to support financial aid. So it's okay to apply for it, and lots of students use it, and you can do it at any time throughout your university studies. An example then, if you were to apply for the Oxford Brookes bursary, let's say your household income was under £25,000, but you weren't aged over 21, so you're going to university at 18, you can be eligible for up to £750 from the Brookes bursary, and that's annual per year. So if you're doing a 3-year course or a 4-year course, you would get that for all those 3 or 4 years. If, for example, you were aged over 21, so you're going to university as a mature student, you could be eligible for up to £1,500 of a Brookes bursary. Now, the difference between a bursary and the loans, which we were talking about earlier, is bursaries do not have to be repaid back, whereas loans do through the system we were going through shortly a moment ago. Bursaries do not have to be paid back, so they're non-repayable. Oxford Brookes also offers bursaries for those who live in a recognised postcode, but you're probably thinking, what does that mean? So some postcodes and areas within the UK, students are less likely to go to university than elsewhere. And as part of that, universities want to attract students from all backgrounds to be able to come to the institution. So those from postcodes where it's less likely that you're able to go, you can be eligible for a Brookes bursary of up to £3,000, and that's per year. So it's quite a substantial figure, and that's on top of any student finance funding that you've paid for. And that's important here because all these figures, the £750, the 1,500, etc., they're all on top of the student finance that you would be generally eligible for, as all students are. So this is not sort of subtracting from those figures, this is on top of. So you can see here on the right-hand side, your annual total funding can be sort of £10,000 or even up to £12,000, depending on your situation. But usually, to be eligible for the bursary, generally your household income needs to be below £25,000. And that figure could change, but that's the current figures for 2021 entry. Now, NHS bursary, there's not too much more to go, but I do want to talk about this. So this has recently returned. So there was an NHS bursary in the past, but it was taken away, but it has returned as of September 2019. And this is for all institutions throughout England and Wales and Scotland. And this is on behalf of the government that basically sponsored and supported this scheme. So it's a minimum of £5,000 per year, and that's on top of any maintenance loan funding that students studying either nursing, midwifery, paramedic science, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, social work, etc., all sorts of healthcare related courses. This is £5,000 that you can get on top of any maintenance loan that you are eligible for. And this is per year. So it's not £5,000 one-off payment. This is per annum. So you get that in each year that you're doing any of these courses on this slide here. This bursary is non-repayable and is non-means tested. So it doesn't matter where you live, what your income is. This bursary is given to all students studying the courses outlined there. And so therefore it's in addition to existing mainstream student support, and it does not replace the student maintenance loan. There is also additional support available for lots of different things. So for example, if you are a parent and going to university, so you may have children, you can be eligible for a parent's learning allowance. If you have a disability, you can be eligible for a disability student's allowance, DSA. And it's important, often a lot of students don't feel comfortable with sharing their disabilities, and that's fair enough. But to be eligible for the DSA, you do need to, on the question when you do your student finance application, say about disability, you do need to write the word yes. You can't declare it at a later date. You do need to make that aware when you're doing the application to be eligible for DSA. But it's a good thing because DSA gives students for a whole range of disabilities lots of support. And we spoke about support on some of the previous sessions, and we'll be talking more about support on upcoming space sessions as well. There is also other types of support. So you can get a childcare grant. So if you have got a child, you are a parent, you can get a grant if you need to help put your children in nursery or have other provision for them. And also if you are a more mature learner, you can be eligible for the adult dependence grant as well. So just for example, I'm not going to go through all of those because they are quite specific, but let's just take the disabled students allowance. Students can get, and this is not an incorrect figure, up to £25,000 per year for support. Now, not everybody gets that figure, so that's because that does sound like a lot, but it can be up to. And the reason why it's a high figure, it's because often those with disabilities might need extra support with things like materials, which sometimes can be expensive, and students are able to use that money to pay for those materials. So, for example, my friend at university had quite severe dyslexia, and when it came to them sort of taking notes in their lectures and things, they found it very difficult to write down notes. So therefore, they used some of the DSA money to buy a dictaphone, which meant that they could record the lectures, and then after the lecture and the sessions had finished, they would then write up the notes in their own time. And they found that a much easier way of taking notes and regurgitating the information in their lessons. And that was one sort of example of how DSA, Disabled Students Allowance, is used. But there are lots of different ways, depending on your personal situation, on how that can be used. So only one or two more slides to go. There is also a learning support fund as well, and this can be used for lots of different things. So it can be used for things like travel and accommodation expenses. So if, for example, you need like a ground floor flat, you can get additional funding to support you with that, having those sort of specific support facilities in place for you. And there's also other things like an exceptional support fund as well. And these are all available from Student Finance England. And they are different from the sort of bursaries that we were talking about that are usually university run. So they are specific for institutions. But these funding mechanism, DSA, that is from Student Finance England. So for whatever university you're looking at, you can apply for these types of funding. So that is pretty much it from me. That was a whistle-stop tour of student finance. I can see there are lots of questions in the chat, which is fantastic. But I will hand over to Laura. And then after Laura has done her talk and she's had her Q&A, I will then come back and answer any questions that you may have. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that useful about student finance. Thank you.
Hi, so I'll just sort out my screen sharing. Just bear with me with the technology.
While Laura's getting everything sorted out, I myself got a DSA. So if anybody does have any questions for DSAs, I can sort of help with those questions as well. I can tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about my story with the DSA, if anybody wants to know. But yeah.
Sorry. Technology is not my strong point. Okay, here we go. Okay, so yes, welcome to the student budgeting section of the webinar today. Sorry that took me a while. Technology and me do not go well together, but I think you should all be seeing this screen well now. So I'm Laura Dempster and I'm the author of personal finance website jeopardy-londoner.com. And so I'm really pleased to be chatting to you guys today about a topic that's really close to my heart. So I'm going to be talking all about budgeting as a student and providing some tips and strategies that you can use to maintain your financial well-being as a student. So I'm hoping this session can be quite interactive. I'll be asking some questions throughout. You can pop your responses into the chat. And if you have any other questions throughout the session yourself, just do pop them in the chat and we can go through them at the end of this session. So yeah, let's get stuck in. It's been a while since I started university myself. It will be 10 years ago this September. I don't know where that time's gone. But one thing that sticks in my mind is the fact that I had absolutely no clue of how to manage my money while I was at uni. I look back on that time and just think about how I could have made things so much easier for myself if I just made some smarter choices about how I saved and spent my money. So anyway, so let's get stuck in and get talking about budgeting. So one of the best tools you can have in your arsenal to feel good about money while you're at uni is the ability to budget. There is nothing worse than the feeling of just living on a shoestring at the end of term when your money's run out. It can also feel really rubbish saying no to any socializing with friends, or if you have to take out additional credit to cover your living costs. So we want to avoid that if at all possible. Yeah, I even have a few friends now who in their late 20s are still paying off credit card debt that they accrued at university. It's still affecting their lives all these years later, so definitely something to avoid if possible. So setting a budget for yourself while you're at uni is really helpful, and it can give you a tool to manage your money in a way that suits you and your kind of ad hoc income. So it's likely that you'll be receiving a student loan in some form, and perhaps you'll also be making some money either during the holidays or during term time or both. So you're likely to have money coming in at quite random times. And it's for that reason, it's really important to make a plan for this money so that you know what's coming in, what's going out, and ultimately you're making sure that you're never going to be coming up short at the end of term. Basically, you want your day-to-day spending to be spread evenly across each term. So with a plan for your money, hopefully you'll be able to do most of the things that you want to do, like going out with friends, going to gigs, traveling home to see your loved ones, and doing that without the need for any extreme saving. So we're kind of looking to hit a middle ground here, where you're not spending excessively, and you're also not being excessively frugal and missing out on things. So that does mean that you might have to make some choices about what you really want. So, for example, maybe you really want to see a bit more of the world, and at the end of the year, you want to go on a trip with your new friends, for example. But you don't currently feel that you have enough money to do this. So you could adjust the way in which you spend your money and funnel off more of your money into a travel fund. So in this scenario, you might scale back how much you're spending socially, maybe do some meal planning to lower your grocery costs, and maybe you could even pick up a couple of odd jobs to generate the money that you need for that trip. So the thing is, when you have enough time to plan, almost anything is possible because you can tweak your spending to meet your needs, essentially. And one thing that's really important about budgeting, and that you need to have in place in order for a budget to work, is you have to really know your numbers, and you have to not be afraid to engage with those numbers. So you need to know the real figures behind your income, your saving, and your spending as well. So if you don't know your numbers and you just guess that you spend about £100 a month on nights out, the actual figure can sometimes be quite shocking. We often have a tendency to underestimate our spending, which is where following an actual budgeting method can be really helpful because it shows you exactly how much you are spending. So next, we're going to move on to some budgeting methods which you can use, which can actually be really effective. So I don't know if anyone watching has heard of the 50-30-20 budgeting method before. I don't know if you can put a post in the chat box if you have or you haven't. I don't know how many of you will have heard this before, but it's probably the best budgeting method to start with if you've never budgeted before. And this is because it's so simple. So the premise of it is that you spend 50% of your incoming money on your needs. So that's things like accommodation, your bills, your groceries, travel costs, books, all those kinds of things. Then you spend 30% on your wants. So that's non-essential spending, things like entertainment, meals out, clothing, haircuts, all that kind of thing. And then finally, you spend 20% on your savings. So, of course, a lot of people will need to adjust these percentages slightly, especially in cities where your needs might total more than 50% of your incoming money. But once you have looked at your incoming money and your outgoings, you can decide on the percentages that are going to best suit you. So, for example, you might say that actually you want to spend 60% on your needs, 20% on your wants, and 20% on your savings. It's really, really flexible. And this method kind of does away with the need to budget across every single area of spending. So, for example, entertainment, meals out, and beauty are all together under one category. That's the wants category, rather than having to keep track of your spending in separate categories and having to figure out how much you'd like to spend in each individual area. There are pitfalls of this method. One is that it's harder to track your expenditure in each area, and it's harder to adjust each month. For example, you might have a month coming up where you have the cost of Christmas, and you have the gift and everything else that goes with it, which might not fit seamlessly into a plan like this. So it's not perfect, but as a starting point, it's great. It's a great method to use if you'd like to get a little bit more control over how you're spending your money. And then the next budgeting method we're going to discuss is the zero-based budgeting method. So this really drills down into how you spend your money, and it forces you to engage with the numbers. And the reason this is called the zero-based budgeting method is that it works on the premise that you will have zero left over by the end of the month. So every penny of your income has been assigned to something, so whether that's spending or saving. And so with the zero-based budgeting method, you will first track your expenses for a few weeks or even perhaps a month to determine how much you're currently spending in each category. And then if you want to cut back on some categories, you can do so. And then you can decide how much you'd ideally like to be spending in each category. So the little screen grabs you see on the screen is actually from a free budgeting spreadsheet that is a free resource for all of you. And this is a really great way to track your zero-based budget. And first, you just add your income to the green section, any debt payments, if applicable, to the red section, your fixed expenses in the orange section. And these are things that you pay for every month, no matter what. Your fixed expenses will be different for everyone. So you can just add and take away from these as you wish. It's very flexible. Again, it's very adaptable. So then after that, the rest of your money needs to go on your living costs, your savings, and your sinking funds. So sinking funds are pots of money which you accrue throughout the year for expenses like Christmas, holidays, birthdays, and yearly bills. And this way your finances are kind of protected. So when that expense does come around, you've already got the money there waiting and ready. And then after that, it's up to you to decide how much you'd like to spend on your variable expenses, the fun stuff, and also what you want to put aside each month in savings. So once you filled out each section, the formula in the black section that you can see on the screen, the final figure section, shows you what your total income and expenditure is for the month and what you've got left over. So this, you don't have to do this every month. You could do this over a term. You can kind of pick how, like, the length of time that you'd like this to be applicable to. And even if you're not always at Excel, there's also a user guide that comes with this resource, so anyone can use this to track their finances. It's also on Google Sheets as well, which can be really handy because you can also access this from your phone, which yeah, just means that you're more likely to fill it out, I think. And so a few other tools that you might want to consider to help the budgeting process are smartphone apps. So I don't know if anyone currently uses the apps pictured here, or maybe if you use a different app, you can pop it in the chat. But like we mentioned, Google Sheets is a great way to keep track of your personal budget. But there's other challenger banks like Monzo and Starling, which can be really great tools for keeping those sinking funds that we discussed separate from your current account. And they also have a whole host of other features to help you save money. I really like to use Monzo for the pots feature, where you can create savings pots for things like events and future purchases. It's a really great way to save for birthdays, holidays, Christmas, and having the pots away from your current account removes any temptation for spending, I like to think anyway. And then Plum is a slightly different app which uses AI technology to analyse your spending and then stash cash away for you. So it's designed that you barely notice the money leaving your account, which is definitely something to consider if you do struggle to save money. Okay, so then I've just got a quick summary here. So some of the key things to remember when budgeting as a student: know your numbers, don't be scared to check your bank balance. You know, when you know what you've got coming in and coming out, you don't have to be scared about checking your bank balance. You have the control over your money. The next thing is to set a budget for yourself, whichever method you think is going to be most helpful for you. Do you remember that if the first method you try doesn't work, don't get disheartened. You can keep trying different methods until you find one which feels right for you. And yeah, do remember you'll get a copy of that spreadsheet at the end of the session, which I hope is helpful. And then finally, use the free budgeting tools that are available to you to stay on track. If apps tend to work for you, use them to their full potential. And yeah, check out some of the apps which you haven't heard of before, and they might end up being really helpful for you. So yeah, there's so much information on personal finance out there, but hopefully this has given you an idea of how to start looking after your money when you're at uni. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for coming along and for listening. This little quote is just a little reminder of how important it is to manage your money to get the results that you want. And yeah, it's time for questions. So if you do have any questions, do pop them in the question box. I don't know if we've had any so far.
So I don't think we have any specific for Laura, as I can tell. Just had a thank you for the interesting and useful talk, which is great. But I think all of the other questions so far have been particularly about student finance, so for Ross. So if no one has any questions for Laura, I think that is it from that. And then we will just move straight on to student finance. But if you do have any other questions, just send us an email and I'm sure Laura will be happy to answer them later on.
Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks.
So shall I do the questions? Okay, Ross, we've got quite a lot for you.
Yeah, I've had a quick look. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
So actually, I don't know if David, do you want to do a little quick introduction, maybe about your journey first, and then we'll move on to the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, so hi, my name's David. I am a second year international business management student. So my journey so far is, so I live with autism, spectrum disorder and ADHD. So I applied for the DSA. With that, I got $2,000 worth of materials and technology that helps. So on top of what Ross was saying, up to 25 grand. Some of what that budget will include isn't given to you directly. It is sort of automatically spent on to the technology. So for me, when I got the $2,000, but so that would include the automatic £400 laptop that would be given to me, as well as the technology such as the senescent note taker application and the what was the one Clara Read. That was a really nice thing. On top of your DSA, if you are applying for a DSA, at Brookes, we do have something called the ISP. It isn't something to do with student finance, but it is something very nice to look into, especially if you're looking for that extra support. In terms of me, in terms of what I've been doing with my student loan, I commute into Brookes University, so I don't have as many of those incurring accommodation costs, but I did have a lot of transportation costs. So and a lot of food costs that I was surprised about. I think one of the things that I didn't realize was something I was going to be spending a lot of money on was food, because I have to commute to university and I'm spending all day there. I sort of have to have like breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the cafeteria, and sometimes I do also bring in my own food. So that did help me a lot. But other than that, actually, if there is one thing that the pandemic has brought, which is nice, is that because I live at home and because I no longer am commuting anywhere, I just have all this money. I just have a lot more money in my account recently, which is nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we can all get on board with that. Not having to commute in has been a bit of a lifesaver. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really interesting. Okay, so we'll move on to questions. So in terms of just income, we had a question which was, do you mean income from savings or savings themselves count towards the household income?
Good question. So it is actually savings from income. So let's say you've got savings for like maybe if you're handing over a house to somebody, or if you've got savings as let's say, for example, somebody's died and you've inherited savings, that does not count towards your income. But if it is going into your account as income, so let's say, for example, you have a second income through, let's say you're renting out a property. So let's say if somebody has died and then you're renting out the property of that deceased person, that is regarded as income. So it's income savings, not savings itself. Good question to ask.
Great, thank you. And then one question that was asked a lot, and we do get this a lot of the time, is whether you can overpay, or if you can choose to pay back the student loan if you're earning below the payment threshold. And is there any advantages to doing that? Would you advise doing that?
Good question, very good question, and a lots of parents and guardians always ask. Funny enough, it was on the Martin Lewis Money Show only a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to watch that episode, it's on ITV Play. They actually had this very same debate about paying off the student loan early. And Martin Lewis, and I agree with his stance, he said it's not a good idea to pay it off early, and I support that as someone who has graduated, and this would apply to me. And that is because the amount that we pay is only based on the income you have. And as we've found out this evening, you only start repaying when you earn £27,295, and the amount that you earn above that figure, it will only ever be 9%. So even if you're earning 40,000, 50,000 and increasing, let's say, it would only ever be 9%. So unlike other loans, you would never get into a situation really where you'd be in financial difficulty. And the other reason why you wouldn't is because when we was looking at the payslip earlier, a bit like your income tax and national insurance, it's already taken out of your pay. So what it's already taken from your gross pay, so your net pay, it's already deducted from it. So really, you've never got to think of it as your income, because you're never going to see it's already going to be taken out before you have your net pay. So you can, though, repay it early, but most people, myself included, do not advise that you do so, but it is an option. I hope that answers the question.
I just wanted to thank you, Ross. I just wanted to add that obviously the student loan, it does stop and start as and when you do have, so say if you did fall underneath that category, the timing of the 30 years continues, but so it will continue going. Even so, say if you were to go above that category for 5 years, you'd be paying off your repayments for those 5 years. And if you then went underneath that for the other 25 years, you will not be paying it. And then after 30 years, it gets wiped. So for whatever reasons, it could be whether you take a maternity break or you go under that threshold or stop working, the clock keeps ticking. So if you did want to, use your repayments to pay it off quicker, obviously, like Ross said, you do have that as an option, but do take into consideration that it may be that you do not pay the full amount back because it will get wiped after 30 years. That's something worth just thinking about. Obviously, you can do whatever you would be comfortable doing or prefer to do, but the chances are that you might not possibly pay the full total off, because within our lives things do change. We become unemployed, we get jobs that are lower salaried, or we have children or something like that. Sorry, Ross.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely totally, yeah, that totally explains it. So often people throughout their lives get into particular situations or going through different aspects of life, and if you're often income and your household situation will change, the student loan, the amount you repay will reflect that change. But as Hannah said, the clock keeps ticking. So even if, let's say, for example, if you're female and then after you've had a baby, you don't return to the workplace, those 30 years, once it gets to 30 years after you've completed the course, it will be wiped. You won't then have to start repaying if you go back to work again.
Lovely, thank you very much for that. Another repayment question specifically, at what point does the interest start being added to the repayment amount?
Now, this is a very important one to know. It actually starts when your first payment comes in from Student Finance England. So for most students, 99.9% of students, it will be about 2 weeks after they first start the course. So it's actually when they start the course, not when they end the course. And also, if you leave the course at any point, but you can go back to it, and you can have those discussions with university, but if you leave and you don't come back to it, you will have accrued interest while you were there. So that does get included as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely something I didn't know when I started uni, and it was a bit of a shock to find out. So yeah, definitely good to know. In terms of scholarships, how do you find out about these? Is there a website that you can go to?
Very good question. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a website, and this would be a great business opportunity if anyone wanted to create one, but there isn't a central website that has all the scholarships universities offer. But most universities advertise their scholarships quite widely available on their websites. Plus, it's usually in the literature, like prospectuses that you might get at careers fairs, or you see when you come to an open day, for example. But there isn't a specific website that tells you all that are available. But there are some useful websites, and I can post them into the chat when the Q&A is finished, such as things like Save the Student, UCAS give advice on scholarships, and there are also places like the Student Room where you can talk to current students like David and many others like David to ask them about what scholarships are available and how to apply for them. So there are lots of useful websites, but unfortunately at the moment there's no sort of central database where everything about scholarships for English universities can be found.
Thank you. Just sorry, going back to the repayments quickly. We've had a question saying, is there a point where it's better to pay off the loan then continue paying it until the 30 years is up? So for example, if you have a really high salary to avoid extra interest being accrued.
That is a very good question. Now, there are, depending on your situation, let's say you were from a background where you've come from a low income, but you go to university and then you do very well, which is fantastic. You then might have very high income, but then you have taken out maybe quite a high maintenance loan to support you while you're studying. You will inevitably pay more within that 30 years if you're earning more. But as you were showing earlier, the amounts are very small. So you're not talking thousands of pounds. Even if you are earning 40, 50,000, the amount that you're repaying per month is still less than £100. So it's probably just less than £1,000 in a year. So really, if you're earning 40, 50,000 net pay, £1,000 isn't really that much. But I appreciate, of course, when you put everything else together, it is something to be considered. But really, the system is set up so that you're never really going to get into debt or trouble with it, because it is taken out of your gross pay before you receive your net pay. The same as, and parents, those who are working will know this, like national insurance and tax goes out, you have no control over that 20% tax. It just goes straight out your account and you don't see it. And it's the same with the student loan. So really, I would think of the student repayments as a graduate tax as opposed to a loan. And a lot of people say it should be called a tax because it behaves like a tax. Whereas with a mortgage, obviously, if you don't make a payment, there are consequences with that. But with this, it goes straight out of your account and you don't have to manage that responsibility of making the payments. With something like a mortgage or credit card, as Laura was mentioning earlier, that is your responsibility.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, I think that's really important to note. Just on that subject of the mortgage, will having a student loan affect getting a mortgage in the future?
Another good question. Yeah, my parents had exactly the same discussion with me when I went to university. Particularly my mum was worried, I'm not going to be able to get a mortgage if I don't pay all my student loan back, etc., etc. It is not taken into account when mortgage lenders, banks, building societies are calculating the amount of money they're going to give you as for what you can borrow. It's not taken into account. And also, actually, what else is not taken into account is any overdrafts or any certain graduate accounts that you have with a bank while you're at university. The things that will count as if you've been able to pay things like personal loans, credit cards, etc., which is obviously not anything to do with university. That's your personal finances. That's what mortgage lenders and providers take into account, not your student loan.
Perfect. Yeah, I can vouch for that. It didn't even get considered for me, so that was good. We've had one question, which actually might be a great question for David, if you're happy to answer this. We've had one question saying it seems really daunting to get into debt in this way for someone who got a full grant. So I think by that they mean if your household income is quite low and you do get that larger maintenance loan, obviously that is quite a big amount. Do students cope with the idea of being in so much debt so early? So what are your thoughts on that? Do you see it as a debt, or like Ross said, do you see it as more of a tax?
Yeah, so there is obviously going to be the stress before, like as you're doing it within your, I think for me, when I was applying for my first year, it was definitely just this realization of, wow, this is a lot of money. But then as you go forward into university and you sort of hear all of these you know, different opinions on it, you sort of realize that it's not, it really is a loan that acts like a tax. It's not going to affect, it affects you in much less of a way than you would. So I think if you are a student and you are, the second you get to uni, I think the biggest thing that you're probably going to be worrying about isn't so much repaying the loan as much as it's going to be budgeting correctly. And then as soon as you get out of university, you can sort of not relax. Obviously you don't need to, it wouldn't be a relaxing situation, but you can sort of feel a little bit more at ease knowing that it's not going to just be something where you're gonna have to pay it back immediately, and it doesn't matter how much you're earning, you have to do it now. A lot of students do get the UK system mixed up with the American system, in which you take, because especially with American media, you take out a huge loan and you have to pay it back immediately, and it's done at high speed, and it is something that you see on the news a lot. But within the UK, it is a little bit more of a relaxed system. You pay it back when you, the government will ask you to pay it back when you're ready to. And of course, with that 9%, it doesn't really amount to much. And because it's taken off before you're even paid, you probably don't even think about it at some point.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Ross, do you have something to add?
I just want to really quickly sort of second, only very for 30 seconds, just what David was saying, because when you're a student, actually, the thing you worry about is your day-to-day living costs. So the thing I really, if in terms of finance, had worries about was the maintenance loan. The actual tuition fee loan and repaying it, it really doesn't, I mean, even now as a graduate, I'm not worried about it. I'm aware of it and I'm not like disregarding it, but it doesn't worry me. The only thing that really worried me was that regular income when we're at university, but I can answer that with regards to MC's question, which I can see in the chat.
Perfect. Yeah. So the next question, again, David, you might have some input into this one, but how realistic is it that the maintenance loan will cover your outgoings for your time that you're spending at uni?
So I think this is sort of where the budgeting really does help, give a helping hand. And it will, of course, depend on your situation. If you do feel like you need more money, I think Brookes does do a thing where a financial situation where they can give you a short-term extra bit of help for financing. I think Ross might have some extra information.
Yeah, we spoke about that in the presentation. Yeah, you can go to Brookes at any time throughout your course, even if you've been there 2 weeks. They're not going to say, oh, why have you spent all your money? They do not go into your personal situation. They will assess it. They will need to know what your income is, because obviously you could be lying. You just want to have more money to go at. But often students generally present themselves in particular situations, and you will therefore be you'll be entitled to and often given financial aid, and that varies of all different amounts. It's not going to be sort of like £50,000 or anything like that, but it could be up to £1,000 or even several £1,000s, £5,000, let's say, if you need it over a certain period for whatever reason. It could be a personal reason, or it could just be that the student finance calculation is not satisfactory for your situation.
Yes, and you can always email us, SFE, if you do believe that you need more money. And so you can email them. There is no guarantee that they'll give you more money, but it does start up that conversation if you do need it.
Thank you very much. Hannah?
Just to say that there is also the option to, depending on your studies, if you would like to get a job. So you can use your extra time to work, and lots of students tend to, maybe if they have a job in their local area, somewhere in like Sainsbury's or Shoe, somewhere like that, there is normally the opportunity to transfer that across to the university town that you are in. So it might be that you have the opportunity to do the same role within that you did in your hometown or city, and transfer that across. Or there are other jobs, you know, normally in student towns and cities, there's lots of sort of bar jobs, restaurant jobs, and things like that. So if money is perhaps something that you might be worried about, there are other options to top up your monthly income.
Yeah, I just second that. In that, for me personally, I went to uni a few years ago now, but yeah, my maintenance loan wouldn't have really covered my rent, or if it did, it wouldn't have given me much to actually live off. So I took up a part-time job doing some lifeguarding. And yeah, like Hannah said, there's so many opportunities to get part-time jobs. Typically, unless you're doing a really time-intensive course like medicine or something, you will have some time to play with. And yeah, a lot of students do have part-time jobs, so I would really recommend looking into that. And the careers team should be able to help you find these part-time jobs as well. They're not just there for when you graduate. They can help you with part-time jobs while you're a student as well. Ross?
Actually.
Oh yeah, over to you, David.
Yeah, just one more thing to add. When you're looking for a part-time job, a lot of students, actually, I've heard a lot of parents and students bring up the fact that Oxford University exists as well. You don't need to worry about Oxford University students, because I don't think they're allowed to have part-time jobs unless it is at their university. So so if you're looking for a part-time job, it is less competition. Obviously, when you get to third year, it is a bit where you're going to have to begin considering whether to take some time off that job, because you're going to have to, it's definitely a lot more intensive. So as university goes on, you'll probably be taking less and less time, less and less hours at the job. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, my point just quickly is on jobs also, it's not just about the money aspect. Something I was surprised at was when I was looking later on in my university years, second and third year, at employment and graduate roles, most, if not all employers now will want students to have at least some experience, if not quite a bit of experience in the workplace, because unfortunately, compared to previous generations, just having a university degree is not enough to sort of sail in through a job, through particularly the graduate programs, which are very competitive. But that doesn't mean you can't get there. Lots of people succeed every year on those programs, but you do need to have some kind of work experience. Most students, if not all students I knew, did something at some point in their 3 years, if not for all of the 3 years.
Thanks, Ross. Another sort of more technical point on the student loan. The question is the interest rate on your student loan fixed at the point you start the loan, or does it go up and down but is capped?
Yeah, good question. So the student loan is sort of the interest on the student loan is in line with inflation. So obviously inflation goes up and down, and the student loan interest rates is at the standard interest rate plus RPI 3%. And you can find out more information on the UCAS website about student loans. I will put a little link into the chat function, but it can be flexible. But in terms of the interest rate, is it capped? The answer is yes, because it's only at inflation plus RPI 3%. So it's not going to be like 50% interest, which maybe some personal loans with a bank, etc. might be. So in the answer to that question, I would say yes, it is capped.
Thank you, that's really useful to know. One interesting question, actually. What are the benefits of going to university over a degree apprenticeship when you lose so much money to tuition fees in university, whereas you make money, albeit a small amount, from an apprenticeship?
That's a really good question. And at the end of the day, it's a personal decision about what you want to choose. Degree apprenticeships are a very good route. So I certainly champion, if that's something that your son or daughter, or even you yourself, wants to go down, that's something I would say it's a very good thing to do. Generally, the benefits of a degree apprenticeship is you're getting a practical experience in a certain field. So if you know you want to go into a particular industry, let's say engineering, or you want to go into healthcare, a degree apprenticeship can be very beneficial. But there are lots of roles which graduates go into which aren't necessarily field specific. And often the sort of advantages that students take away from university, it's not just the knowledge that the students gain, it's also the skills and the experience. You hear the student experience term often voiced within news and media. But actually that really is quite significant. And that really helps prepare the graduate for the employment. Because that sort of thing where you're moving away from home, managing your budget, managing your time, those skills, you don't necessarily get the same when you're doing an apprenticeship as you would if you did the fully fledged university experience. And those skills are very, very valuable, not just for employment, but also for life development. I am now a lot more mature and aware of the world as a graduate than I ever would have been had I gone to university. And I know that because comparing to friends who haven't gone, and I was at the same level as them at 18, I now have more awareness about independence and other things than they do having gone to university. So I can see as a graduate those benefits.
Yeah, just to add on to that, with the different fields, especially with things such as business studies, you sort of go into the whole range of things. So it's not just, it would normally be for an apprenticeship, I would see a specific area in a business or a specific area in engineering, whereas here you sort of learn about the whole dynamic thing. So you learn accountancy, you learn marketing, you learn all sorts. And I think another thing to know about university is that you also have that student life and the connections that you make from going to university. So you know, when you're going to university, you're going to a place where there are other people like you, and this is almost a great way. And also, Brookes gives an amazing opportunity to, with events of their own, to connect to not only people around you in your course, but businesses, managers, all sorts, and give you that connection that maybe an apprenticeship might not have. And so that can be a really valuable thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And yeah, just to sort of reiterate that I went to university just because I was really interested in the subject. So it also just depends on your motivations. If you literally just want the degree to go into a specific career, then yeah, a degree apprenticeship might be the better route for you. But if you're just wanting to sort of get that degree, but maybe you're not 100% sure on what career it is that exactly that you want to do. So for example, I did sociology. I didn't really want to become a sociologist, but I just really enjoyed the different things I was learning. And I haven't actually gone into that specific route, but I'm really pleased that I did go to university, and I wouldn't have known when I left school what it actually was that I wanted to do. I've chopped and changed different careers, and I've only now sort of at 28 realised what it is that I want to do. So I would just say that as well, you have to be pretty sure on what you want to do if you do a degree apprenticeship. Okay, I think we've just got one more question, which is quite a specific one again. We might need to do a bit more research into this one, but it's whether we can confirm that the maintenance loan is not available for the Art and Design Foundation diploma. Ross, I'm not too sure if you know that.
Short answer, because the answer is yes, I can confirm that it's not available, but I'll tell you why. And that's because, and it's good news, because that course is available for further education colleges, and it is free. Actually, it's probably the only course in the UK that's free if you do it before your 19th birthday. And that's your, so let's say, but in that scenario, if your 19th birthday is on the 1st of September and the course starts on the 15th, it's in the year that your 19th birthday will fall on. So everybody's basically got at least a year. But it's a very specific course if you want to go into the art industry, and most students do it as like a stepping stone between leaving school or college and going to university. And often it's taught in partnership between local colleges and universities.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Ross. I think that is all of the questions. So I will pass back to Hannah just to round us off.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, for all your questions. I hope it was really helpful. And David, it was lovely to hear your examples as well. So thank you very much for joining us. And again, thank you for giving us your evening. I hope this has been interesting and useful. I know that student finance can be a little bit daunting, and we hope we have sort of eased those daunts ever so slightly. If there are any questions you want to know the answers to, please do email us at space@studyhard.ac.uk, and myself and Kat will get back to you. And if you would like to email them before this evening, we'll get them in the email that will follow shortly. But if not, we'll just get back to you individually. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. And please don't forget the survey at the end when you close down your screen. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much to the panelists. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.